Hi, everyone. Welcome to this very special edition of The Defense Never Rests. I'm Megan with Melissa.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Great. Today is different and special because we are at the Claims Exchange Conference in Philly. And we did something similar last year at another conference, and it just worked so well to have this podcast booth and pull people in for shorter little episodes and just get like a lot of different guests at once. So I'm really excited to do it again today.
And it's fun because you never know who you're going to talk to.
Right.
Like we don't know anybody who's going to be coming on the show today. It's all just folks who are attending the conference. So it's going to be interesting to just figure out their stories and what they're doing and how they got there, because strangers always have the best stories.
Yeah, and like they don't totally expect us to be here, so they're not like planning to sit down for a podcast. And I kind of like to keep it authentic and keep it easy and simple and
Exactly.
and just have just conversations. So let's get started.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hey, Jeff, welcome to The Defense Never Rests. How are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy you came on because you walked by and you're like, I'm a fan. I love it. I love getting
Pretty famous, Megan.
I know.
I don't know if you
It's
know
the only
it.
place I'm famous. It's in my house and here.
No, and on the internet.
On the internet, on
Yep.
LinkedIn, I guess. Yes. But we're at the Claims Exchange Conference in Philly, having podcasts here all day, and just pulling people in. And I'm so glad you've decided to sit down and chat with us for a little bit. So how have you enjoyed your time so far?
This this conference has been really, really good. It's very different than all the other conferences. It's so small that there's a lot of new people here. Mm-hmm. And I know the first few conferences I went to, I was very intimidated. This one is really welcoming because it's so small that you see new faces and everybody goes over and says, hi, welcome to the club. So it's been a lot different and a lot more welcoming.
Yeah, and from talking to Sydney, I feel like that's the vibe they're really going for, is kind of to do it a little bit differently, to make it less intimidating and actually make it more collaborative. Because a lot of conferences I find that you go to, you don't end up really talking to anybody because it's just so overwhelming.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. You mentioned when we were talking before we started filming that you were a litigator, but now you're a consultant. So what is it that you did and what are you doing now?
Well, right now, actually, I'm in between jobs. But I have been a claims manager for one of the largest national corporations, private corporations in the country. Before that, I was the director of risk management for the school district of Philadelphia, about a mile up the road.
Wow.
Before that, I was the deputy director of risk management for the state of New Jersey. And before that, I was a litigating attorney. I was board certified in workers' comp and litigator.
Okay.
So
I asked this, and since you're a fan, I asked this of a lot of my guests. How was it that you wound your path to go to law school? Because everyone's a little bit different in why we decided to do that. So what was your path?
I always wanted to go to law school. I always wanted to be a lawyer. I never pictured myself in the world of claims. Mm-hmm. I have always had a fascination with the Constitution. In fact, I had the CLM article in July reviewing the U.S. Supreme Court decisions. Mm-hmm. I did an article on medical marijuana and all the different federal and state laws and how they are interwoven, and tried to pull apart that spaghetti bowl. But I knew I always wanted to be a litigator. And so you hit that point where I can either be in a courtroom all the time, mm-hmm. or I can go to the courtroom just a few times, but really wrestle with really tough issues. And it happened to be my path went the first way.
Yeah.
And then after that, I was working for a firm, and I was also involved in politics. And I ended up getting breakfast with the governor one morning. Mm-hmm. We got to talking about workers' compensation, and he finally just shook his head and said, I don't get it. Why is workers' compensation so expensive in New Jersey? I started talking to him about it. He said, would you like to do a consult? I turned to the firm and I said, I've been asked to do a consultation. They said, you'll have to take a leave of absence. Took a leave of absence to do it and never went back to practicing law.
And if you can say, what issues were you consulting on? Because that's pretty fascinating.
Well, the expense involved with it. Why is it so expensive? And I had been I had been a plaintiff's lawyer, a claimant's lawyer, and then I became a defense lawyer. So I saw the world from both angles. And though both the plaintiff side or the claimant side, petitioner side in New Jersey is called, and the defense side would both say, it's a lousy system, it doesn't work, the other side has the advantage. No, New Jersey is actually a very well-balanced one. And it just happens to be that more times than not, the employer isn't protecting themselves. And when I say protecting themselves, I'm not saying from a legal standpoint, making sure I legally position myself. You have a factory that's really, really loud. As an employer, I can either get proper ear protection, or I can buy everybody their hearing aids for $5,000. What's cheaper, buying an $8 set of really good headset, or the $5,000? And so that's where I moved into claims and claims management and risk management, and started proselytizing folks. If you're going to be buying everybody hearing aids, your insurance rates are going to go up. Your deductible is going to go up, and your competitor who's doing it the right way is going to undersell you.
Yep.
So that's
And then you're dealing with occupational claims that are going to, have long-lasting sort of exposure for the company, especially like you said, with a hearing loss.
right. Or let's say somebody who keeps getting people keep getting their hands crushed. Well, if you put the guard on, the cost of the guard is going to be cheaper
Than the claims
right.
arising from
and
the guard.
then the the reputational risk. Up until about 6 years ago, reputational risk was the number one concern, or maybe 10 years ago. That was the number one risk. Then it became, after that, it became cyber. And only now, within the last year and a half, it's been replaced that the C-suite's number one concern is the supply chain.
Well,
But reputation has always been, how do you get workers to come to work for you when
Everyone's getting hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's tough. It's a tough sell to try to go work, bring people in if you're known to have an unsafe work environment.
Yeah. And realistically, that's what this is all about. As a claims group, we're talking about let's help everybody to understand what the exposures are, what our risks are, so that way, from an insurance standpoint, from a claims standpoint, a claims manager standpoint, from a risk unit standpoint, so that we can address it appropriately.
Right.
And reduce the risk.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think would be the goal.
Yes.
Now, before when we were speaking before we started, you had said that you had given a talk today about the opioid crisis. Is that
Yes.
right? Can you just tell us a little bit about that? Because I know that's on a lot of people's minds nowadays, especially.
Well, as far as opioids, of course, everybody's been watching Dope Sick and
Right,
that whole
right.
routine. What people don't realize is that when OxyContin was the key, when OxyContin hit the market, it was the first sustained release opioid. And it was actually kind of cool. They put paperwork in the packaging that told you how to get a better high. Seriously, they did. What they did was they said, do not chew, crush, or break the pill. It'll cause you to get too much opioid. It's like, thank you. Any other good suggestions? Maybe wash it down with a beer? But as soon as it was approved, they started marketing it to the workers' compensation world. It was a win-win-win because they were marketing it where you had chronic pain. The opioids were solving the chronic pain. The employees loved it. The insurance companies didn't have to pay for all these operations. In fact, one of the key studies that got the approval, the conclusion of the study that appeared in the journal Pain in 1986 said that actually opioids were more, quote, humane, close quote, than surgery. So now insurance companies could buy the pills instead of doing the surgery.
Yep.
And of course, Purdue was loving it too. Well, the question is, how do you now get out of this cycle?
Right.
And realistically, I hate to say it, the only way you can do it is on a legal basis.
Yeah.
This is a very simple legal argument. And so it turned out that today the room was filled mostly with lawyers, where I was explaining to them, this is how you try your case.
Yeah.
This is where the flaw exists, and this is where you can point out it's time now to break the cycle.
And how do you do that? What is
Right.
that argument?
It comes down to there's two types of analgesics. There's the opioid-based, and there's the non-opioid based. So opioid-based would be Percocet, Vicodin,
Oxycontin.
right? Oxycontin. The non would be your NSAIDs, Flexeril,
Yeah.
Aleve, Motrin,
Right.
Tylenol. And what happens is when you have an injury, let's say it's your elbow, you have pain. The pain is because you have swelling, and the swelling's pushing on the nerves.
Yep.
You also have what's called the COX-1 and the COX-2 enzyme, and they're irritating the nerve. If you are taking non-narcotic analgesics, it reduces the pain, it reduces the enzymes, and so the pressure's taken off and lowers the pain. You are relieving the effect of the injury.
Swelling, right? The
Right.
inflammation.
Well, the standard I've worked now in 36 different states, in 36 different jurisdictions, and it boils down to the employer's responsible for all reasonable and necessary medical to cure or relieve the effects of the accident. Well, opioids don't cure.
No.
They don't promote skin growth. They don't promote nerve regeneration. They don't cure. But as far as relieve, the injured employee, rightfully understands that I take my pills and now I don't feel pain and I can move around. Yes, I get relief.
Right.
And the lawyers, we like to poke holes in the argument, but ultimately the final statement was, I get relief. We lost. Then their doctor gets on the stand in the same process, and ultimately the testimony, I get relief. We've lost. But then you talk to the doctor and you say, wait a second. The non-narcotics reduce the swelling. That's providing relief. The opioid-based analgesics attach to the opioid receptors in the brain, and the swelling is still there.
Right.
The enzymes are still there. You're not getting relief, and therefore the opioids aren't right.
Right. They're almost tricking your mind to thinking you're getting relief rather than actually giving you the lowering the inflammation that you need.
Right.
Attacking the source.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And that argument is gaining more and more ground. So, and somebody asked me, well, how many times have you won the argument? And I looked at him and smiled and said, I've never won the argument. I've never won the argument. And they looked at me and said, well, hold on. No. The reason I'm here is because I've never won the argument. Every time we raise the argument, the injured party's lawyer leans over to our lawyer and says, can we agree to a brief adjournment? I think we can settle this one.
Right.
Right.
So-
But that is a win.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a win in a
I just
different
haven't
way.
had a judge rule in my favor yet.
Right. Yeah. I think that's such an important thing to talk about, too, because even from me sitting here listening, I'm like, that makes perfect sense. You know, it makes perfect, like, medical sense.
You know, the thing of it is, with opioids, after a while you build up a resistance, your brain starts creating more opioid receptors, and you're just spiraling downward.
Yep.
And so if we can, as an industry, as a society, if we're breaking that cycle, I'm not out to punish a worker. Lord knows one day it's going to be my turn to be injured. And when that time comes, I want the right treatment.
Right.
And opioids, they have a place. I
Sure.
don't say that they don't have a place, but 13 years after a broken ankle, they have
Right.
no place.
Like, should they be used for long-term pain management versus, like you're saying, like, you know, like you said, they have a place, but should a person be on it for years and years with the doses just increasing because they're becoming, you know, tolerant to
Yeah.
the drugs? It's just, it ends badly for so many people. So it's interesting that there's this other perspective out there that can maybe help, you know, steer away from the opioids. And I think you mentioned medical marijuana in a workers' comp contacts prior
Yes.
to us starting. And, that's a hot issue in New Jersey, especially
Yeah.
because
Yes.
in New Jersey, the comp carrier cannot pay directly for the marijuana because it's federally illegal, but they'll reimburse the injured worker for the medical marijuana that they buy. So it's very interesting to see. And what is your take on it?
Well, okay. New Jersey actually has a case where the New Jersey Supreme Court said, no, you have to pay.
Right.
What happens is the federal law, the CSA, or Controlled Substance Act, has marijuana as a Schedule 1. And so whenever there's a federal law involved, let's say ADA is a good example. If I get addicted to opioids, if I have a heroin addiction, I can be covered under ADA. If I get caught with cannabis in my bloodstream, I can't claim ADA because ADA is a federal law, and when
Yep.
the feds wrote that law, it is presumed that they knew that the CSA was there and that the two have to work together. New Jersey, what happens is, first off, there's a single sentence in this massive federal budget. It's a footnote. And it says, it was eliminated during the Trump years, but it's now back in, that says that the federal government may not spend any money, the Department of Justice may not spend any money on the prosecution or arrest of anybody involved in the medical marijuana community in a state where they have a medical marijuana law. So the feds can't the feds cannot come in and take any action because they don't have the funding to do
Right.
it. So they can't touch New Jersey. The problem is that the cases have been raised, the arguments have been raised but it's the federal banking system, and therefore CSA is going to apply. New Jersey said no, that's not right. We have the right to do it, and the workers' compensation judges have limited jurisdiction, so they can't rule on the constitutionality of this or not. The state court said, no, you have to pay for the medical marijuana. Versus Minnesota, where they just had it, and the Minnesota Supreme Court said, nope, that's a violation of the CSA. You can't pay it. But the interesting thing is that it was taken to the U.S. Supreme Court from the Minnesota Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court said, we're not interested in hearing it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they didn't want to touch it.
Yeah. And even one of the most conservative justices on the Supreme Court, Justice Clarence Thomas, in a case involving marijuana and taxation, said, the basis of this whole marijuana discussion is a case that didn't make any sense, that came before us long ago, and it's time to revisit the issue.
Yeah.
So even the Supreme Court has indicated, Congress, do your job.
Yeah. I think we will be seeing those changes happen sooner rather than later. Like there's
Right.
a lot of rumblings and things happening that I think
Yeah,
we're going to see those changes.
absolutely agree.
Yeah.
And do you know, have you seen any studies or just from working in the field, is the use of medical marijuana for an injured worker, is it just as good as having to take an opioid? Like, how are they seeing it actually implemented, and is it working?
There's arguments on both sides. That's why I'm smiling. It's
It's not so easy,
Yeah.
right? It's not so cut and dry.
I mean,
It depends.
well, yes, I can absolutely say it depends.
Yes.
Let's see. There was a study that I read where normally you do a blind study or a double-blind study. This was the ultimate blind study. They took dogs that had hip dysplasia and arthritis, and they studied the gait of the animals, and then they started giving the animals cannabis, and they saw improvement. So there's valid proof there on that one study. It's just one study. On the other hand, there was a case where the court ordered medical marijuana, I forgot what state now, and the gentleman then proceeded to buy something like $15,000 worth of marijuana in 1 month. Goes back into court, and the argument is, obviously, he's abusing them.
Right.
And his answer was, no, I'm not. If you want, I can give it all back to you. I can't find the one that actually is going to work for me.
Yeah.
The problem is that at this point, there's no standardization.
Mm-hmm.
With an opioid, I can give you an opioid, and it's too strong, we'll cut it in half. It's not working, we'll up. With marijuana, there's a lack of consistency at this point.
Yeah, we recently had on someone from Canada who works for a medical marijuana company, and he's like, they treat it very differently. It's very pharmaceutical based, so it seems like they've moved more towards that direct dosing, where in the U.S. we're not quite there yet.
We're getting there.
Yeah,
and it's the problem that on one hand, I personally have an issue with it because we don't have it as tightly, I don't want to say regulated or controlled, but we don't have the sophistication yet.
right.
But the only way we're going to get to that sophistication is someone's going to do trial and error. Maybe
Right.
we can steal it from the Canadians who are doing it or the Europeans who are
Right.
doing it, but somebody has to do it and fail, and you have to be bold enough to be willing to fail.
Yeah.
So that way you can succeed, so that way we can then get that skill, get that knowledge, and it's going to take a while.
Yeah.
I think it's part of the solution. Just like opioids are not the absolute answer, just like surgery is not always the absolute answer,
Right.
cannabis is going to be part of the conversation, part of the answer.
I mean, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Just like we talk about it even with like litigation and case handling, there's not a one-size-fits-all
Right.
approach to every case. Each case is individual, and you have to devise your defense plan accordingly.
Correct.
It's not
Yeah.
a check the box.
Unfortunately, a lot of times what happens is the court does check the box on a new area. From my experience, and the reason why is because as the field is developing, they are trying to have the long view of have consistency in their decision making, and sometimes it's hard to differentiate twins. Would
Yeah.
work for one, I have to do it for the other,
Yeah.
because the subtlety of the differentiation
Yeah.
gets lost in the opinion too
Yeah.
often.
Well, I can see why your talk was probably very well attended.
Well, no, the reason it was well attended was because I said there would be some giveaways.
Were they giveaways
sounds
that you were
fun.
talking about? Because I imagine you might have
Were
gotten a lot
there
of people.
free samples at the end of your talk?
I have some candy here for you.
Actually, when I did the medical marijuana presentation a couple years back, normally they have mints on the table for the speakers to keep your throat wet. I replaced them with gummies. And somebody asked the question. I was waiting for the moment. Somebody asked for the question. I went, ooh, this one's a tough one. I went back over to my chair and I pulled out a gummy that was about this big, a gummy bear about this big.
Jeff is real calm and chill during his talk. You should come back.
And in about 45 minutes, we'll continue the conversation.
Nap time.
Well, Jeff, I asked if you know this because you listen to the podcast, but knowing what you know now throughout the duration of your career, what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, gosh. Do better in science so you could have gone to medical school.
I don't know. I was pre-med and here I am. I was pretty good at science.
I don't know. And the reason I say I don't know, I've been asked that question a couple times in my life, and I guess the only thing is this happy saying that I have, which is be bold enough to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Or actually, the little sign I had on my desk was, be bold enough to suck at something new.
Yeah.
That if you would have asked me, would I be sitting here today doing this? Not on your life, but you don't know where life is going to take you. Just roll with it. It's just, no matter where you land up, you're going to learn something new. It's going to be fun. Just go with the flow. So, no, I wouldn't give any other advice to my younger self than be bold enough to suck at something new.
Yeah, I think that's great advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to tell my kids that.
No, because they'll say, Mom, nah, believe me, you've got that mastered. I can say that because I have a college son. Yeah. If I say it to him, I know that's what the response would be.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to us and taking some time away
Thank you.
because I know there's so many good sessions going on, so I appreciate you taking some time away to chat with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.